and the session is being moderated by Vinod Pavarala. Dhanya Rajendran is the co-founder and editor-in-chief of the News Minute and the founding chairperson of Digipub News India Foundation, which represents nearly 100 independent outlets, including The Wire, Scroll, Quint, and News Laundry. She received the Chameli Devi Jain Award for Outstanding Woman Journalist 2022, the Red Ink Journalist of the Year Award 2023, and was nominated for the RSF Reporters Without Borders Impact Award 2025 for her work defending press freedom and accountability journalism. The Global Investigative Journalism Network recognized her investigation into India's electoral bonds as among the best investigative stories from India. The News Minute was also the first to uncover the voter roll manipulation scam. Pamela Philipose, currently the ombudsperson of the New Delhi-based news portal The Wire, has served as editor-in-chief of Women's Feature Service. Earlier, she was the senior associate editor, The Indian Express. She has served as advisor to the media task force of the Government of India's high-level status of Women Committee report. She's the author of Media's Shifting Terrain, 5 Years That Transformed the Way India Communicates 2019. A Boundless Fear Gripped Me, How the Other Half Lived in the Pandemic's Shadow 2023, and Framing the Media, Government Policies, Law and Freedom of the Press in India 2025. The moderator, Vinod Pavarala, is Senior Professor of Communication and UNESCO Chair on Community Media at the University of Hyderabad, with a dual background in Sociology and Media Studies and a PhD from the University of Pittsburgh. His research and teaching have been in the areas of communication for social change, community media, and media and democracy. He has been a visiting faculty at several institutions in India and abroad, including Princeton University, Duke University, Loughborough University, University of Queensland, and Ashoka University. At the University of Hyderabad, he has previously served as the head of the Department of Communication and Dean of the Sarojini Naidu School of Arts and Communication. I welcome you all on stage. Over to the moderator. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone, for being here at this first session. So let me begin with a story that's now familiar, but still unsettling. In recent years, journalists and news organizations in India have found themselves not just reporting on power, but constantly negotiating with it. Sometimes through courtrooms, sometimes through opaque regulatory notices, sometimes through sudden loss of access, loss of funding, or even platforms. A story is published in the morning. By evening, the newsroom is responding not just to readers, but to lawyers, regulators, or digital intermediaries. None of this is announced as censorship. It arrives instead through rules, procedures, compliance requirements, and the language of oversight. This is not entirely new. From the very beginning, independent India has had a very uneasy relationship with news media, one shaped by licensing regimes, press laws, emergency powers, and shifting ideas of national interest. What has changed is the terrain. News today circulates through digital platforms, algorithmic feeds, and mobile screens. It is produced faster, consumed more intimately, and governed through a mix of state regulation and private platform control. So this conversation sits precisely at this intersection between the long history of media policy and the lived realities of contemporary journalism. Pamela Philipose, in her recent book, Framing the Media, traces how media policy in India has never been neutral. It has been shaped by political priorities, economic interests, and ideas of order and discipline, often revealing more about the state's anxieties about the excesses of journalism. Her work reminds us that what we call regulation is always also a way of framing the boundaries of dissent and legitimacy. Dhanya Rajendran represents a different but equally important story. as the founder and editor-in-chief of the News Minute. She has built an independent digital newsroom outside the traditional media power centers, one that speaks across languages, regions, and platforms. Her experience captures both the promise and the precarity of digital journalism. Editorial independence alongside financial vulnerability, and I hope we'll get to talk a little bit about that, Dhanya. Yeah. The reach that digital platforms have alongside regulatory uncertainty, visibility alongside the risks that come along with it. So together, they allow us to ask some urgent questions. What does media freedom mean in an age of platforms and policies? Who governs the news today? The state, the market, or the algorithms? And what does it take to practice independent journalism when rules change faster than news cycles? This is not just a conversation about journalists, it's a conversation about all of us as citizens, as readers, and the kind of public sphere we want to inhabit. Yeah? So these are some very important questions, and I am delighted to have Dhanya and Pamela on this panel and the opportunity to have this conversation with them. So let me start with an opening question to both of you. When we talk about media freedom in India today, what exactly is under threat? Is it journalistic practice? Is it institutional autonomy? Or is it the public's right to know? Maybe, Pamela, we could start with you. And
Here?
Very sharp. The point is, of the three categories that you mentioned just now, I think it's a combination of all three. And the fact that freedom of expression and speech are part of our living reality is the most important point I think we should take away today. If it's a single point you have to take with you back home, it is this, that you as the public have the right to free speech and to receive information of every kind. So we must start with that because that's what the founding parents of this institution called India, institution, country, whatever, call it what you want. You know, they fought very hard to ensure that this right was protected. And some of them saw it as the heart and soul of the Constitution. And if you know your Habermas, you know the others, the fact is that that speech and the fact that we as human beings, as communicating persons, you know, the one thing we bring to society is this ability to actually communicate to each other, exchange ideas, dissent. Dissent is very, very important because otherwise we would have, our nation would be a silent nation. And we have heard from the best minds that ours is not a silent nation. Ours is an argumentative nation. But of late, it seems that the argumentation has fallen off the map. And I think that's where I leave it to Dhanya to take it.
The three things were institutional?
I said journalistic practice, institutional autonomy, or the public's right to know.
I think it's a combination of all three, like Pamela said. But about the public, I would like to begin with the public's right to know. I think the greatest danger to the public's right to know is from the public itself. Because the public has, to a large extent, I'm not talking about everybody, not perhaps people who land up at Lit Fest on a weekend to actually listen to so many sessions, because you are definitely more aware and cognizant of your rights and freedom. But I'm just saying generally, a lot of pushback comes from the public public itself against the right to know. For example, if we publish a story, the first reactions of why did you publish does not even come from a political entity or a corporate entity. It's coming from the public, which identifies itself to group A, group B, or group C. They are the ones who try to censor you first. So for a reporter in a news organization, a lot of times the censoring is not coming from any authority. Like the government is not invested in reading every story everybody's publishing because they got other work to do. But it is their minions, their countries, their armies across social media, different platforms who are now constantly monitoring these stories, and they are the ones who do the first pushback. I can tell you a lot of my young colleagues feel very scared, skeptical of a next story because of the backlash that they've received for the first story. And that could be a political story, it could be about women's rights, it could be about a film actor, hundreds of things, right? So the public's right to know in many ways is being, I think there is an impediment from the public itself, which we have to realize. So for every 3 people who tell me, why did you do the story? I'm thankful to that one person who will tell me, I did that story. Like when I came here, Professor Vinod said he read a profile that we had done on billionaire Sridhar Vembu 2-3 weeks ago. And I told him, in my career of 21 years, I have never gotten so much abused, even for doing a story on a political entity. There is on one of the right-wing platform which says, the exact words, okay? Imagine a man who sells his mother for money, and you put a News Minute journalist next to that man will be principled. Why? Because we wrote on the billionaire and lots of things about him, right? Pushback is so severe that journalist will think of self-censoring the next time. Now the problem of institutional and journalistic integrity, I think both get impacted at different levels. I was a reporter with a TV channel for 8 years where we kept saying nation wants to know loudly every day. But for a major part of it, I was insulated from what is happening in the sense that I did not have to worry if there was a case. There were hardly any legal cases. Maximum would be somebody telling us to put a apology, a corrigendum on the channel. I can remember one Kolkata judge had filed a case on Times Now because they put a wrong picture. Or there were hardly 1 or 2 cases. But today, it's an everyday issue. Like, there are legal notices coming in, and I live in Bengaluru, where the magistrates have taken an oath, I think, injunctions per week. Hindu, for example, has 500 to 600 injunctions. And it is for random things. Like, for example, there is a woman who was caught for a scam. Her name comes with a place's name. Like, she is Hyderabad Aruna, let us say. So there's an injunction saying, don't use Hyderabad. And the magistrate has given it. The other day, there was a DGP of Karnataka who was caught in a scandal where he's seen, for the lack of a word, making out in his office. And now there is an injunction saying, don't report on it, not saying don't use the visual. So it's a combination of things, right? And then the biggest problem is the government of India. Half the time, I think I am on some 5-6 legal groups. Digipub main legal, Digipub small legal, TNM news laundry legal, because there are so many cases. And every day the government, not every day, that's an exaggeration, but every 6 months to 1 year, there's a new bill that is being brought. There'll be a broadcast bill one day, there'll be something else, and then we have to sit and think. I think Apar Gupta has a session in another hall the same time. So Apar is also part of all these groups, and then we are sitting and brainstorming as to who should move against this bill, how should we move. So that's also become a part of the job. So all this put together puts pressure on the entire newsroom and every journalist.
Pamela, you want to add something?
Yeah, I want to add to this. I want to say that, why did the public become like this? And there are several reasons. The fear that has come, in the media sphere is very, very palpable. So, and what the government has done through various rules is to incentivize the third person, the lateral entry of a person who has a complaint. And that person is empowered to make that complaint. So a combination of all these reasons that we may know our constitution, we may know that this is a guarantee that we have, but there are enough people, like you say, within the public willing to sell that right down the drain. And that's the worrying thing. And I think we as a group like this, the fact that there's so many of us in the room today indicates that I think there is an interest in trying to defend our turf. And I hope, we go away from this session with some interest in doing that.
Pamela, I do want to ask you one direct question about your book. And this is a book, Framing the Media. And don't let the slimness of the book fool you. I mean, Pamela really packs a punch in these 150 odd pages. Very interesting, fascinating history of India's media policy. Your book shows that media policy since independence has often combined democratic language with very deep distrust of the press. So do you see continuity between earlier policy frameworks and today's regulatory approach to digital news?
Very much so, but I must say that, this drive to control speech, public speech, predates independence. It goes back, in fact, the first law of censorship was passed in 1799. So we have a long history. And of course, the colonial state had every reason to shut us down. And one of the reasons they brought in the Vernacular Act was that they were really scared of the media in the vernacular languages, because the English media, they thought they could control. At least they'd know what was being written. But the Vernacular Act was a terrible act which came in the late 19th century and meant that even the premises and the printing press could be taken away without a magistrate's oversight. So it was pretty stringent. So I would say that there is continuity over the long arc of time. And there is continuity between print media, television media, radio, and digital media. There is continuity. But what digital media has done is to enable ordinary people to communicate. You see, through the internet, the ordinary person can self-communicate. And therefore, the power of digital media is very, very manifest. And that's what people are worried about. If every one of us in this room has an idea that we put out in the ether, then what happens to the control of the public narrative? So therefore, the present government has actually concentrated on shackling digital media. And I think Dhanya will add to that. She just did, the very fact that they have so many cases and so on is indicative of that pressure to tamp down. And digital media has another thing which is very important, and that is that it is relatively less cash-centric. It's easy to put out your messages. If you were a television company, you would need all the infrastructure, and the very expensive infrastructure. If you were a print media, you would need also a lot of money to keep running. Newsprint would account 50% of your outgoings. So there is a lot of diffidence in these media to actually put compromise or get government attention on them. But the digital media, to some extent, has escaped that. The news portals, some of the best news portals, and I would put yours as part of that, is the fact that they've been able to communicate in a way that is relatively less, demanding of their resources and more free, therefore. So maybe you could add.
I just want to, if I can add to what Pamela said towards the end on the digital platforms. Independent digital news platforms are often celebrated as alternatives, but they also face very intense financial, you also mentioned the legal pressures, platform pressures of various kinds. From your experience at the News Minute, where do the biggest constraints on independence actually come from today?
Okay, just first thing, I am an eternal optimist. Therefore, I don't see anything in the realm of something which really bogs us down, because I see everything as something we move towards a solution for. Therefore, just putting that into perspective, financially, I think everybody's. We're doing a story just now. I think it'll be published tomorrow about a new Malayalam news channel coming up. Malayalam already has, I think, 10 news channels. Telugu has around 26 news channels. So in this crowded market, how do you have one more channel? And there's a person in that story who says that it takes 100 crores to run one Malayalam channel annually. If 1/10 of the money, I can run the News Minute and News Laundry. That is the money that we are talking about at the size that it is now. So that's the same for most digital media organizations. The money that we require as of now is not a lot. It is, of course, substantial. But even raising that money becomes a problem for a lot of people, because we don't want to take investment from vested interests. A lot of people have chosen not to have advertisements at all. Like The Wire is run by a foundation. So they work in a different way. So I think financial is a problem, but we are all figuring out small ways. Like, we are a heavily subscription-based organization. Slowly, steadily, people are understanding that we must pay for subscription. Like, I have my colleague Paul here, former colleague, sorry. Paul quit and left to PR. Therefore, Paul wrote a story a few years ago about an IAS officer in Telangana, for which we are still facing some 3-4 cases in Hyderabad, including a 100 crore defamation. But the point is, a lot of people signed up to read that story, while it's not of any personal interest, right? So it's to drill in the population that you must pay for your news also. Like, for example, today afternoon, well, you will go to a Third Wave or a Starbucks to have your lunch, which is your daily thing. Why not think of news as something that you want to pay for? So that discipline is what we want to instill in people. But I get that people are getting saturated. How many do you pay for? There are some 7 or 8 alternate news organizations. We want Live Law. We also want Bar and Bench. We also want to pay for Scroll or Wire or TNM. So there's a saturation coming. I don't know how we are going to deal with that, but I'm sure we'll figure a way out. The biggest challenge, I think, comes from this itself. See, because governments will come, go, they will bring in new policies, new changes. Some governments arrest more than the others. Some will put more cases. That's something we can deal with, right? But it is about our financial sustenance that we are most concerned about, because that we have to ensure despite who's in power.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of innovative things I saw, groups like News Minute having tried both editorially and otherwise, managerially as well. One was, I was very fascinated by your participatory editorial decision-making idea that I joined one of those meetings once, and that was an interesting, I've never seen anything like that. And secondly, your frequent collaborations with other platforms to do things like election coverage. Do you want to say something about these kind of innovations? And
I think innovations are just because they're also a necessity. Yeah, but what he's talking about is we have editorial meetings. I can see some familiar faces here who are our subscribers, so they do come for editorial meetings, and they will tell us story ideas. Sometimes we collaborate with them, even in doing story ideas. Like, there'll be a tech guy who will come from somewhere and who will tell us that this is the angle you should look at this story. Or someone who's a teacher who will tell us another angle. So these are ways in which we participate with readers as to how to make our stories better. So that's an incentive for everybody to also take subscription, by the way. Yeah, but the other point about why the news organizations decide to come together for elections, Caravan, Scroll, The Wire, News Minute and News Laundry came together. Whenever people ask me how, I always think, how do we come together? Maybe because 3 women editors are there. That's my first answer. Because 5 male editors, absolutely no chance that they're going to cooperate and come together, because can you imagine those meetings? They'll all be like, who gets more airtime? But no, I'm sorry, I'm just joking. They were all very nice and cooperative. But this is a moot point. There were 3 women editors. Now, the reason we did that is because a Maharashtra election is happening. We don't have any reporters in Maharashtra, but I know someone sitting in Karnataka or Tamil Nadu is equally interested. We started with the Karnataka election, which was a high voltage election, which the entire country was watching, because it was a direct Congress versus BJP battle, right? And there was a lot of interest across states. That's when we decided, why not pool in all our resources and we do an election coverage. I mean, maybe people stayed on to watch our live coverage only for 15 minutes or 20 minutes because we don't have the graphic or, you know. But I was just happy that they did that even for 20 minutes because those people who came there will also tell us solidarity, right? So we will do it now for the Kerala, Tamil Nadu elections. We have been doing it for all elections now. And slowly, I hope that will become a model to pursue.
Great. Pamela, I was just wondering whether you would like to say a little bit more about the kind of regulation we are seeing today, which seems to operate often indirectly through IT rules, platform policies, content moderation, compliance norms, and so on. Is this a shift from overt censorship to more procedural control? And how does it change resistance? Censorship in some ways is very clear in your face and you could resist it. And how does it challenge resistance?
Before I come to your question, Vinod, I want to just take this. The difference between, election coverage of the kind that Dhanya and others have done is manifest. But the point is the race course type of excitement of mainstream media, it's almost like you can almost bet that this party is winning, kind of thing. While here, it's a more deliberate, distanced view of something that is happening. So it would be the more serious people who would tune into your kind of coverage. While most people would like to go, they'd like to know who's winning, where is it going? Are the two horses running abreast or is one taking ahead? That kind of thing. And it's very interesting. And on that is riding so much money. So you have exit polls and you have so much. I mean, the money that is, that is inherent in that is something mind-boggling. And we'll never know how much money rides on that, how many stock market, sort of billionaires are made over that one process. So remember that news is also money-making, and it comes through in various ways. About the policy kind of thing over a period of time, the question you asked was, can you just repeat it?
No, I was saying, the nature of regulation has changed. From direct censorship to procedures.
So it's much easier to do it through government orders. Policy of this kind, you see, because if you pass a law, you need to present it in Parliament. There are many phases to that. While here, just by passing orders and having a pliant bureaucracy, you can do what you want to do. And that's what's changing now. You're quite right in focusing on this because but earlier too, we had a few instances, even in the Congress era. But now you're seeing a lot of so-called policy making done in this sort of, I would say, underhand, because there is no full disclosure. There isn't, it just, left to the public to make what it can out of it. And most often the public keeps quiet,
So just to give a nutshell of what are the kind of policies which have come in the last few years. First, the digital media rules, which I think everyone is aware of now. But for the simple newsroom, how it works is, we have to have a grievance officer to whom the complaints will come. So that's the first level. We have a grievance officer to whom any complaint can come. So now how is the government wanting to weaponize it? When I say government, I'm not meaning just the union government. I mean even a lot of state governments are trying to weaponize this, or parties, even film actor fan clubs. So you write a story, you send a grievance, let's say everybody in this room sends a grievance. My grievance officer has to reply to each person individually in 48 hours. Now, if you're not happy with that grievance redressal, then you go to the next level, which is a committee which is formed with a former judge, with 3 people who are from NGOs. So every organization has to have this committee. Like DigiPub has a committee which means every news organization has to be part of such a committee, right? So the grievance goes to a committee next. The third layer is the Ministry of Information Broadcasting. Now people can go directly to the INB ministry, or they can go through all these process. People who simply want to create trouble. For example, the BJP chief of Tamil Nadu, Annamalai, one day had a problem with a cartoon in a Tamil magazine called Vigadan about Narendra Modi, the Prime Minister. We don't know who, I can't remember who filed the official complaint. Within a day, Vigadan website, Vigadan is a 100-year-old magazine in this country. Their website was shut down just a single day because they went to the ministry. So the ministry has powers to shut you down. It can be a story, it can be one URL, it can be the entire site. You don't know how the emergency powers will be invoked. Now keep IT rules aside, all of us have gone to court. I'm one of the litigators in the Delhi High Court. Then it was stayed. Some of the clauses of this rules were stayed. Then you have the IT law, in which every time they try to bring amendment, sometimes we just wake up to a new amendment and then we go to court again. Then they try to bring the broadcast bill, which thankfully was impacting not just news people, it was impacting everybody. For example, if you're a vlogger and you're just going to the high-tech city and saying, hey, this is like Bangkok or Singapore, you can't still upload that on your YouTube. You have to have a committee of 2 people who look at it, of which 1 person has to be from a marginalized community. So people really were against it, including all content creators, which is why the broadcast bill was never passed. But we hear that a second version is coming. Then there is a privacy, which now DPDP, which now has brought in clause which has weakened the RTI Act. So there are so many ways in which this is happening. It's not just one bill or one act. So you don't know why. And then the last is the Sahyog portal, against which Digipub did go to court in the Karnataka High Court, surprisingly with Elon Musk, who also did not want Sahyog portal. Sahyog portal is basically a portal where any state police, any state department can go and complain, saying that I don't like this tweet. Who uses it most? Tamil Nadu, Telangana, West Bengal. All these states are using this, taking down tweets, and these are of regular people or their political adversaries. So there are so many different ways in which censorship is happening around us, but we remain unaware.
So one last question from my side before we can invite a few audience questions to both of you. Looking ahead, what should citizens, readers, maybe there are some young journalists and aspirants to be journalists. I mean, their tribe is shrinking, by the way. In our media classes, very few of them raise their hands when you ask how many of you want to be journalists. Now, what should we all be attentive to, not just in defending press freedom, but to reimagining what independent journalism can look like in India? I mean, of the kind that News Minute and other portals are practicing.
I think we can take a hint from the work that Dhanya and others are doing, in the sense that they're looking for serious stories, that impact ordinary people. So your election, you exposed how the election, people are trying to manipulate elections in Karnataka. I think. It impacts us because it's our democracy that's being compromised. Now, I was thinking of SIR and that whole process of thousands of people being knocked off, without even understanding who these people are. And the Supreme Court has time and again said, put out the lists and explain the reasons why you have kept these people out. That so far has not been forthcoming. And as a journalist, I would say the most important thing is for the media to find out who these people are, because the government is not going to do it for you. Talk to them. I happen to be a jury member for a public hearing. About 200 people were there, and 10 states were represented, and it's the saddest stories that emerged. But none of these stories have made it into mainstream media, and that's what's disturbing, in the sense that, issues of consequence to each one of us is being left on the board not taken up. Because once you silence the media and the public discourse on issues of this kind, then there's a silence of death. And that is what I fear we are going through.
To the, the vote chori allegations, which you were mentioning. So we did an investigation in 2023 about an organization called Chillumai, which was working with the BBMP, and they were basically looking at who are the voters, what are their voting patterns. It's a long story. Anyway, to cut the long story short, after we did the investigation, the Election Commission of India had to intervene, and they asked for recalibration of votes in 3 constituencies. That is the constituency which Rahul Gandhi picked up in his first press meet of vote chori called Mahadevpura. So the fact is, 2 small newsrooms, one Kannada newsroom called Pratidhwani and us, we did an investigation which 2 years later became a much bigger thing of vote chori. But if I'm candid enough, I can tell you that because News Minute and Pratidhwani did, it would not have had the impact it did. The only reason it had the impact is because the mainstream media in Karnataka actually gave their heft to us. From Deccan Herald to the Hindu to the Kannada channels, they all saw there was merit in the story and everybody followed up. See, that is the kind of media ecosystem that we need. The story can be broken by anyone. The story can be anybody's investigation. But the moment you see that is in interest of your democracy, everybody has to come together. That story would have been just another investigation by the News Minute that would have disappeared because we don't have the algorithm to make it reach a lot of people. But it became a success like that. And to all the younger people in classrooms who don't want to become journalists, I know how difficult it is. I mean, we don't hire too many, but even when we try to do, it's very difficult to hire from Hyderabad, especially people who know Telugu, because I feel nobody wants to become journalists here. Cannot blame them because it doesn't give too much money. But of course, lots of them. Like Paul, whose example I took here, I'm sure if he's given, Paul, you can actually put your hand up because everybody is wondering who it is. Yeah. So if given a chance, I'm sure Paul would come back to journalism only. Because at the end of the day, we all realize what a privileged position we are in because we are given the task of telling somebody else's story. Someone trusts you with their story. Someone tells you their trouble. Someone tells you their hopes, their aspirations. And there is no other job that I would trade this for. Therefore, for young people, I understand that it's not a very lucrative prospect career-wise. And in many other ways, I had a young journalist who used to write about women's rights. After a point of time, she told me that I worked 5 years for passion. I got awards, I got recognition, but how much will I push further? I get too many abuses, and my friends in other industries are doing much more better than me. So maybe journalism for 5 years, please give it a try if you're a journalism student, and then you go somewhere else.
Can I just add a little bit? Just one more point, that when the public takes up these issues, it does make a difference. I know that in Karnataka, for instance, hate speech beda. You know, these are public-spirited individuals who came together and actually went to newsrooms across the state and asked them, why are you putting out this toxic stuff? Why are you hurting the country that we belong to? And it has had an impact, and it has, in fact, I don't know if it's still there, but I think it is still. And we need we need the passion of the civic-minded individual, apart from the passion of the young journalist, yeah.
Thanks to both of you. Yeah, maybe we have time. Couple of questions from the floor. Maybe tell us clearly who the question is directed to and make it brief, please, so that there is some time. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead, Bhargav. Yeah. Yeah, it's on.
Yeah, I am Bhargav. I'm a journalism studies researcher, and I'm very much familiar with your work. And we cited as well, and we interviewed Dhanya. I mean, you were talking about state regulatory, issues, legality, and actually the public. But I think there is something which is happening in India, which is actually happening in the US and the European context as well. There's some strange phenomenon. When I was working as a journalist, it was not there. I mean, Dhanya was in Times Now, I think, then. There is something called anti-media media. I mean, media is pitted against other media. And it's not about forms of media, but they're saying this is not the way to report. Recently, as recent as just a week ago, in Telugu, Andhra Pradesh and Telangana, I mean, they were saying, I mean, one TV channel, journalists were arrested and they said this is not the way. And they ran an editorial, one newspaper. And similarly, it's happening in Bombay, it's happening in Delhi. I was just wondering if you can throw some light on that, anti-media media.
Okay, thanks.
I don't know why you call it as anti-media media. If a media house is doing wrong reporting, I don't think there is a problem in calling it out. Though I would not advocate for anybody's arrest for that. And if you really want to arrest, you arrested the editor and the owner, not the journalist who did the story, because that shows that the government does have the ability to, I mean, my point is this is just to threaten, right? You're talking about an NTV story where they spoke about a minister having, one of the complainants are here, the IAS Association complaint. But I'm just saying that I think it's anti-media. It is okay to have commentary against the media, and I think that is very important. And it has to come from the media itself, because self-censorship shouldn't be there, right? It should be censorship from within the media house, and I think there's no problem with that. I wish we all face more criticism.
But I have another take on this, in the sense that if you unpack, if you go to that particular incident and unpack it, you will see that there are vested interests also at work. And one has to be sure that there are no vested interests before we take that to fire.
That example is a bit skewed because there are too many vested interests. Yeah.
Not that example, but media siding with the government and saying other media is wrong. That is what I'm looking at.
Correct. But this is a bit of an extreme example because everybody has vested interest in it.
Can we have that woman in row 5? Yeah, in black, yeah. Yeah, just keep going, yeah. Yes, please.
Hi, Dhanya. Yeah. Like Pamela ma'am had mentioned that vernacular press, they lost the printing press at some point. And I feel like I see that happening with the Indian journalism and news organizations. At which point in the next, maybe, to the next term of the government in power, do you think the worst would happen to our digital printing press?
I couldn't hear it properly.
Can you just repeat the last part of the question? Yeah.
Pamela ma'am was talking about the vernacular press losing the printing press literally.
Shut down.
So I see that happening to digital news media every day, whether through censorship and whatever the laws that are coming up. What is the worst that you anticipate till the next term?
What is the worst I can anticipate? Like, sometimes I think, okay, some ED will come, freeze my accounts, and I'll be running a cat shelter. But what else can you do? You can put somebody in jail for 5-6 years. The worst is Gauri Lankesh being shot down at her house. Yeah, I mean, that's the worst, right? But my point is, see, on a daily basis, we can't operate thinking what is the worst which will come at us, right? Because then you can't write, you can't do anything. You can't also think of whether you will make an impact. Both of these things are problematic. You can't think of whether it will be a downfall or whether your story will impact. You are here because you're chroniclers of history. You're leaving this for the next generation to read. Sometimes people ask us, why do you report every Pramod Muthalik speech? He says hateful stuff every day. Because it is a record of history. And I can't think whether me writing it once will have an impact. 5 people also may not read it. But the point is you're leaving this. Same way, can't think of consequences all the time.
Your question, in Kashmir, for instance, we have heard, I mean, the latest was that some correspondents writing for national papers have had, their names outed and, attacked. I mean, they were asked to sign bonds before a magistrate that they will not commit that mistake again. So we are seeing different gradations of this censorship, and I think the state of J&K has seen the worst of this kind, including shutdowns and takeaways of machinery. You know, so, yes, so.
See, if you ask me the worst, the list can go on. Like, not only in Kashmir, we have so many states in which journalists are jailed, terror charges are put on them. So many things are happening, right? We have to keep objecting to that. But I'm saying that can't be what makes us not do things. We cannot continuously think of that.
Okay, the coordinators are reminding us we don't have too much time. One last question. Yeah.
Yeah, hi. My name is Sanjeev, and I happen to be a subscriber to both The Wire and the News Minute and News Laundry. Hello. Now, the context to this question is that today we have a very polarized environment, very polarized society. It is visible even in the family WhatsApp groups, the alumni WhatsApp groups. You know, there's so much of explosive interaction that is taking place. Now, in this sort of an environment, what does freedom of press actually mean when you are basically reaching out to echo chambers or highly polarized groups? So one is the definition of your interpretation of freedom of press. Second is the impact on editorial decision making, because ultimately you will only be talking to that particular echo chamber or group, because the rest are determinantly going to ignore you or rubbish you.
Okay, I think it's clear what you're trying to say.
You said your name is Sanjeet. Everybody be like Sanjeet. Subscriber of 2 different alternate media websites, yeah? That's the first thing. Yeah. But the second part is that, again, like what her question was, these are existential problems, right? Like, what is your end goal? What are your problems in front of you? Who are you catering to? Like, there are news organizations which have, for example, there's a newspaper in India which has a television screen in their big newsroom where the analytics is put out every single minute, which is who's reading what story. So if you look at the Times of India, I don't know if they have it anymore, but before, if you go to Times of India website, they used to have this slideshow of actors in bikini. And you just keep doing like this, Deepika Padukone in same bikini, 100 pictures like that. That was one of their biggest hits. So if I go with algorithm, then that is a pitfall, because the Indian public at one level is also hypocritical, because we ask for serious journalism. If we put a story about something, they'll say, why are you doing this? But they actually read it more. Right? So going by algorithm is a very, very problematic thing. The other thing is talking to echo chambers. That is a worry I always have. But I feel there's a younger crowd who are constantly discovering. So we can't keep in mind that the middle-aged, older people are perhaps in an echo chamber already, but there is a much younger population which are just opening up their minds to all this, and so we have to be constantly at it. The only challenge is how to reinvent. If I do a 1-hour video, nobody cares. If I do a 1-minute video, everybody loves it. So how do I reinvent an organization, a person? That's the only challenge.
A quick response, yeah, Pamela.
Yes. You know, the point is putting anything out in the public gives it new life. And now with so many different types of media, it gets picked up. It's very important to break that silence, that transition from a non-story to a story is a very important transition to make. And once that transition is made, that story remains. And especially in digital media, it's interesting that, years later, it could come up again, because it is public. You had made that point. Once it's a public record, then it's there. It's history in the making, And therefore, I think we get much of our self-worth from that ability to be able to speak for not just this generation, but future generations.
Thanks, Pamela. I mean, just 20 seconds to wrap it up. I mean, at a time when regulation often arrives quietly and intolerance towards dissent becomes normalized, conversations like this matter a lot, not just to defend press freedom, but to ask what kind of public conversations we want to sustain. The news, after all, is not only about what is reported, it is also about what is allowed to be said, what is allowed to be heard, what is allowed to be questioned and remembered. So thanks to our panelists, Dhanya and Pamela, and to all of you for being part of this public. Thank you.